I'm Nima Rajan. Nearly 1 million doses of Pfizer-BioNTech and Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccines were delivered last week as the country continues ramping up its immunization efforts. But Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says Canada has been given a heads up about manufacturing problems with Johnson & Johnson's recently approved viral vector vaccine. Although 10 million doses have been pre-ordered, J&J's subsidiary, Janssen Pharmaceuticals, has yet to provide a date for when Canada can expect to receive the first deliveries. As COVID-19 vaccine supplies ramp up across the country, most provinces and territories have released details of who can expect to receive a shot in the coming weeks. Dr. Teresa Tam says as more people get vaccinated, public health guidelines will evolve.
Well, I think it's really important that we, again, adapt our measures when it is safe to do so, while considering, as I've just said, the evolving scientific evidence, but also expert advice and balancing risks and benefits. And I think, what I will say is that together with the other chief medical officers, we'll be constantly assessing not just vaccine coverage, by the way, but the risk of transmission at the community level.
Vaccinations for seniors are already in full swing in Quebec. Ontario says it is aiming to begin vaccinating people over 80 the week of March 15th. An advocacy group is setting a legal challenge to the Canadian government's quarantine hotel policy. The Canadian Constitution Foundation has filed an application with Ontario's Superior Court of Justice along with 5 individuals. The legal challenge seeks to end the government's quarantine hotel policy. The group argues that hotel quarantine requirements are overboard, arbitrary, and grossly disproportionate. The push to amend Bill C-7, which expands access to medical assistance in dying, is nearing its end. The Trudeau government has given notice that it will impose closure to ensure the legislation comes to a final vote in the House of Commons before a court-ordered deadline of March 26th. Closure, final debate, and a vote all seem likely to happen today or tomorrow, given votes are not allowed on Fridays and the House is not sitting next week. Lieutenant General Frances Allen has become the first woman appointed as the military's second in command. Her appointment as Vice Chief of Defense Staff comes as the military grapples with misconduct allegations against top brass. Former Chief of the Defense Staff, General Jonathan Vance, and his successor, Admiral Art MacDonald, face accusations of inappropriate behavior. General Allen was seen as a possible contender to take over from Mr. Vance before Mr. MacDonald was selected for the job. Crown prosecutors are seeking a 6-year sentence for Corey Huron, the 46-year-old Manitoba man who smashed into a gate at Rideau Hall before heading out on foot towards the Prime Minister's current residence, armed with several weapons. Mr. Huron's lawyer describes his client as a hard-working member of society who suffered financial difficulties during the COVID-19 pandemic that put him into a state of depression. Advocacy groups representing youth in government care are calling on the provinces and territories to maintain support for those who are supposed to be aging out of the child welfare system during the pandemic. Melanie Doucette is a McGill University researcher studying the effects on youth aging out of care during COVID-19. She says those in care are already at higher risk of homelessness, unemployment, and mental health issues. A number of jurisdictions will see moratoriums on the move come to an end on March 31st. Well, COVID-19 has been tough on everyone, but it has been a year of extreme challenges for frontline workers. According to a new survey, some of the country's doctors are feeling high levels of fatigue and anxiety. The Canadian Medical Association says 64% of respondents cited spending more time under social restrictions as contributing to their fatigue. More than 60% also refer to uncertainty about the future and concerns about Canada's vaccine rollout as negatively affecting their mental health. Canada's horse racing industry is calling for special protections as legislators weigh a private member's bill to allow one-game sports betting. The bill would amend criminal code provisions that prohibit gambling on single games of football, hockey, and other sports. It aims to eat into the multi-billion-dollar black market by legally opening the books to gamblers. The bill has garnered tentative support from the horse racing industry, but it remains wary of casinos and offshore gambling websites encroaching on its turf. Mining industry insiders say opportunities for Canada are rising with world demand, technical advances, and political support for the electric vehicles. But they say support from the government is needed to help the industry find the capital and develop a plan to bring on new mines and processing facilities. Todd Mallon with international mining giant Rio Tinto says the country has many advantages, including abundant natural resources, mining history and expertise, and a good environmental record. All right, stay with us. Up next, we have our TIA Health Medical segment with Dr. Abhishek Raut, Medical Director at Appletree Medical Group. Stay tuned. With mass vaccination campaigns underway across Canada, questions are rising around our efforts to get back to normal life. Currently, there are 4 vaccines that have been approved for use in the country, and millions of doses are secured for our national inoculation plan. New U.S. guidelines say people fully inoculated against COVID-19 can drop some precautions when gathering with others. However, at least 2 provincial health ministers in Ontario and BC say existing public health advice for this country holds for now. Meanwhile, Pfizer Canada says there is no evidence to suggest delaying the second dose of a vaccine past the recommended 21-day waiting period can provide sufficient protection from the virus. This comes after the National Advisory Committee on Immunization said last week that the second dose should be delayed for up to 4 months so that more people can get a dose faster. So it looks like we have lots to touch on today in our TIA Health Medical segment with Dr. Abhishek Raut, Medical Director at Appletree Medical Group. Welcome back to Forum Daily, Dr. Raut.
Thanks so much for having me.
So let's start with Pfizer Canada. They're saying that there is no evidence around the success of delaying the second vaccine doses past 21 days. What do we know so far about this particular method of treatment, doctor?
Well, initially in their clinical trials, Pfizer couldn't really determine the efficacy of just one dose, and they did set it at approximately 52% based on the second dose at 21 days. But there have been some really promising developments, especially from British Columbia's Center of Disease Control. They looked at Pfizer's own data and determined that the vaccine efficacy of one dose could actually be closer to 92%. So this has led the National Advisory Committee on Immunization, called NACI, to change the recommended time really from 3 weeks between doses to up to 4 months.
Now, considering that Canada's national inoculation plan was already slightly delayed from the start, what are the benefits of potentially delaying the second dose, Dr. Raut?
So here, the biggest hurdle right now that we've experienced is really procuring enough vaccines. All the countries are having their own rollout vaccine clinics, and we do receive small batches relatively from Pfizer and Moderna on a weekly or monthly basis. So the benefit here is if we can delay that second dose, we don't have to worry about saving our supplies as much for that second dose, and in fact give those to more people. So NACI says if we can actually delay that second dose to 4 months, close to 80% of Canadians over 16 could get at least one shot of Pfizer or Moderna by the end of June.
And are there any potential downsides of delaying doses, sir?
Yes, I think the biggest one here is that this is a decision based on limited evidence. The studies that NACI discusses themselves haven't really collected data of 4 months. We're basing it on 2 months, really. So critics of this delay consider that this is more of an extrapolation of current evidence rather than actual fact here. And so certainly there is that risk to use extrapolated data.
Now, in terms of transmission, what do we know so far about a person's ability to maybe spread the virus after being inoculated following a single dose and then after both shots?
Yeah, this is a great question. So initially, even the WHO said that there's some limited evidence about this performance of vaccines. We use them to prevent death or severe illness. But it's actually quite reasonable to assume that there is going to be quite a bit of protection against transmission. AstraZeneca, very preliminary, has shown in the Lancet that it can decrease the positive cases by 50% after 2 doses, possibly 67% in the initial first dose area. Pfizer has shown a very similar reduction, 85% of symptomatic COVID cases, and more importantly, 75% reduction of asymptomatic cases. So very promising data here so far.
Now, I want to go back to recent U.S. guidelines. They say that vaccinated people, fully vaccinated people, can get together without the need for masking or social distancing. Do you see something like this happening in Canada as more vaccines are administered?
I think we'll certainly see something similar in Canada. We do need to increase our vaccination numbers. Keeping in mind, the CDC has made an interesting statement with that. They're saying that vaccinated people can gather, but they also recommend that they do, in fact, wear masks and social distancing, which of course brings the old adage, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
And now, considering that a certain amount of the population may not be comfortable getting vaccinated, how do you think we can protect non-vaccinated Canadians when things start to maybe open up, Doctor? About 45 seconds left.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think what we are doing here is we're coming back full circle on what was recommended in March. Until we have a significant number of vaccinated population, the most important aspect is still prevention, hand washing, face masks, social distancing, and then that's for everyone until the case counts are low enough for us to not worry.
All right, Dr. Raut, always great having you on Forum Daily. Thank you again for your time today, sir.
Thanks so much for having me.
Now, don't go away. After the break, we take a deeper look into the Line 5 pipeline and how its cancellation would affect the city of Sarnia, Ontario, as well as the rest of Canada. We speak with Sarnia's mayor, Mr. Mike Bradley, after the break. That and more news from around the world coming up next. So stay tuned, everyone. We'll be right back. Canada's Natural Resources Minister is calling the cross-border Line 5 pipeline a non-negotiable element of talks with the United States. Seamus O'Regan is vowing to defend the underwater pipeline as he testifies before a special House of Commons committee on Canada-U.S. relations. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer has pledged to shut down the Enbridge pipeline, which links Wisconsin and Sarnia, Ontario, through the Straits of Mackinac between Lakes Michigan and Huron. Minister O'Regan says the pipeline is a vital source of both jobs and energy for northern U.S. states, as well as southwestern Ontario and Quebec. He says a shutdown would instantly create an energy shortage in the region, equivalent to 14 million barrels of oil a day. Mr. O'Regan also says there are clear signs from the courts that a settlement between Michigan and Enbridge can be reached to avoid a shutdown. Well, to talk more on these developments, we are joined by the mayor of Sarnia, Mr. Mike Bradley. Welcome to Forum Daily, Mayor Bradley.
Thank you very much.
So how has the city of Sarnia been reacting to the potential cancellation of the Line 5 pipeline?
Well, quite obviously, with great distress. There are probably 3,000 jobs directly in the area, high-paid jobs that could be impacted with job losses if this line closes.
And sir, to understand the bigger picture, how much of this oil product is used in Ontario and Quebec overall?
Well, about 45% of the fuels used in this province in Ontario come through this line from the west. And that there are 3 refineries in Sarnia, and they are critical to the economic development of Eastern Canada. So to be put in this type of situation it's not very good for our relationships with Michigan. And if the United States president supports the closure of the pipeline, it will be a disastrous start to his relationship with Canadians.
And speaking of international relations, we understand that Line 5 also provides oil to some Midwest U.S. states. How much of this product does this line provide for international customers in the U.S.?
Well, this is the interesting part, is that in Michigan, it provides over 50% of the propane to the North Peninsula of Michigan. The Detroit Airport relies on the jet fuel, just as Toronto Airport does, that comes through this line. So it's not just Ontario and Quebec and Alberta impacts, it's also in the state of Michigan. And ironically, just a couple of weeks ago, Governor of Michigan, Governor Whitmer, had to declare a state of emergency because they didn't have enough propane. And that's with the line operating. So it's very hard to understand the motivation behind this.
And we know Minister O'Regan has been keeping you updated. What do we know so far about Mr. O'Regan's fight in the courts to keep this pipeline operating?
Well, his position was quite quiet in the federal government still about a week ago. And I give the minister a lot of credit. They came out and said very clearly, we will fight this politically and we will fight it legally. And it's my own belief in the end, it'll probably be a legal solution and it'll probably be a negotiated solution, as was said in the intro, that will let both parties walk away with the line still operating.
And we know Enbridge, on the other hand, is looking for permits and approvals to replace the Michigan Great Lakes crossing with a $500 million tunnel. Would this be a possible solution?
Well, it is a solution. It's one of the reasons I support this proposal. $500 million that will employ Americans to upgrade and make sure this pipeline is safe, which, by the way, has never had an incident in its 60 years. So in this case, Michigan will win from this by getting better protection of the pipeline for the future, and also getting the jobs that will go with this. It'll be a long project to encase it, but they'll be Michigan jobs.
And for our Canadian viewers to understand this impact, what's at risk here, Mayor, in terms of the overall jobs and maybe even the cost of fuel if this pipeline is canceled?
Well, there's more than that just a risk. I mean, there's 3,000 to 5,000 direct jobs. It also will mean that fuel costs will skyrocket in Ontario and Quebec. And you might recall just 2 years ago, there was a propane shortage because of the CN strike, and it was causing great distress in the farming community. So there's a lot of other impacts, and not just propane and oil come through this. The oil that comes through goes into thousands of products that enhance the Canadian economy. So there's a lot of impacts here. But one that I've written to my fellow mayors in Ontario that needs to be remembered, if this is supposed to be environmentally prudent, what it's going to do if the line closes is put more trucks, more rail cars, more barges into the environment. And who wins from that?
Interesting point there, Mayor. Now, we've got a little under a minute left, but what can Canadians do to add their concerned voices to this campaign, sir?
Well, I think it'd be helpful. This is remarkable. We have all the political parties, except the Green, as far as I know, supporting this. That's really rare. We've got the BQ supporting this on a pipeline. That's just amazing, given the pipeline politics in this country. I'd suggest they contact a member of parliament, tell them they're supportive. They don't want their fuel costs going up. They don't want more rail cars and trucks in their communities, and they don't want added fuel prices.
All right, Mayor Bradley, always great having you on Forum Daily. Thank you again for your time, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And we take a look at top stories from around the world after the break as the U.S. Congress gets closer to approving a COVID-19 relief spending bill. Meanwhile, jury selection continues in the case of George Floyd, and Myanmar cracks down on media coverage in the region. That and more news from around the world coming up next, so stay tuned. U.S. Congress is on the brink of approving a massive spending bill that would deliver nearly $2 trillion of COVID-19 relief. The Senate returned a partly revamped version of the measure to the House last Saturday by a 50-49 vote. Republicans have unanimously opposed the measure as bloated and oblivious of signs that the dual crises are easing. Jury selection opens its second day in the trial of a former Minneapolis police officer charged in George Floyd's death last May. Derek Chauvin faces second-degree murder and manslaughter charges. Several potential jurors were dismissed yesterday, including some who said they wouldn't be able to set aside their strong views about the case. The three jurors who were selected, 2 men and 1 woman, all said that they had heard some details about the case, but would be able to keep an open mind. Often described as paradise on Earth, Hawaii is looking more like a flooded disaster zone today. Catastrophic flooding from a stream swollen by heavy rains is prompting officials to order evacuations from a town north of Honolulu. The order comes just 1 day after fears of a dam breach resulted in another evacuation order on the island of Maui. Flooding damaged or destroyed about 6 homes and 2 bridges on Maui. Myanmar's military-controlled government is cracking down on media coverage of mass protests, raiding media companies and draining dozens of journalists since its February 1st coup. The crackdown comes as the military has escalated violence against mass protests. Independent media continue to cover the arrests and shootings by troops in cities across Myanmar. In some instances, journalists are using social media to get the information out. Libyan lawmakers have confirmed a newly appointed government to lead the war-wrecked country through elections by the end of the year. The government of Prime Minister-designate Abdul Ahmed Dbeiba replaces the 2 rival administrations that have split the North African country for years. Mr. Dbeiba, a powerful businessman from the western city of Misrata, was appointed last month to lead the executive branch of the interim government. Libya was plunged into chaos after a 2011 NATO-backed uprising killed longtime dictator Muammar Gaddafi. A former Hong Kong pro-democracy lawmaker and activist says he has relocated to Australia. Ted Hui Chi-fung says he will continue campaigning against the Chinese Communist Party. So far, Mr. Hui is the only Hong Kong activist to be granted an exemption to enter Australia during the pandemic. Like scores of others, he is facing charges under Hong Kong's sweeping national security law that critics say Beijing is using to stifle dissent. China and Russia say they will build a lunar research station, possibly on the moon's surface, making the start of a new era in space cooperation between the 2 countries. It describes the project as a comprehensive scientific experiment base with the capability of long-term autonomous operation. It says it would be built on the lunar surface or on the lunar orbit that will carry out scientific research activities. China drew heavily on Russian expertise in the early years of its space program. The head of a prominent cybersecurity firm says state-sponsored cyber attacks are seeing a second wave, and he says the culprit is China. Kevin Mandia of FireEye says China has launched another wave of hacking, paving the electronic path for ransomware and other online attacks. The first wave of attacks blamed on China exposed tens of thousands of servers running its Microsoft's Exchange email program to potential hacks. For Mandia, Mr. Mandia, he says the scope of the new attack is much larger than the original. Civil liberties activists are suing a California company that provides facial recognition services to law enforcement agencies and private companies around the world. The suit claims Clearview AI violates California's constitution and seeks an injunction to bar it from collecting biometric information in the state and to delete data on California residents. The lawsuit says Clearview has fielded requests from more than 2,000 law enforcement agencies and has assembled a database nearly 7 times larger than the FBI's. A researcher has revealed that a bull moose spent several weeks wandering around inside the fenced perimeter at the Prince George Airport before it was coaxed to leave. Roy Rhea of the University of Northern BC says the moose was first spotted in late November and wasn't convinced to go until January. Mr. Rhea says the moose spent several weeks at the airport feasting on fresh tree growth and never came near the airport runway, but had to be removed for safety reasons. He says the successful eviction means the animal has a chance to increase declining moose populations in the area. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for news on demand, you can always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and make sure to follow us on our social media handles on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also watch all our programming on the News Forum YouTube channel. All right, stay tuned for other programs on our network. We also have commentary shows on economics, politics, Canadian law, and social issues. Stay tuned, and we'll be back with a new episode of Forum Daily tomorrow.